Hey, thanks for the question. It is worth asking, what does Jesus mean when he talks about hell? Because he actually talks about it more than anybody else in the New Testament. So there's three things that you need to remember when you're interpreting the words of Jesus. Number one, that in much of his teaching, he's using a common ancient Near East genre that can be referred to as the wisdom genre. Number two, that in Jesus' day, there wasn't a set definition of what hell is. Many rabbis from the time think that it doesn't exist. Some rabbis wrote that it does, but it lasts 11 months. And other rabbis think that you just are annihilated when you die. You cease to exist. And number three, that Jesus says very conflicting things about hell. In one passage, he talks about the eternality of hell. In the majority of passages, he seems to be an annihilationist, meaning that you cease to exist. And in a lot of passages, he talks about saving everybody. So what does it mean that he is using the wisdom genre? Well, if you look in the Old Testament, you'll see a lot of wisdom books like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And one facet, one hallmark of the wisdom genre is that they use high, overblown, incredibly hyperbolic language. A good example of this is in the Proverbs where the author says that when you have a wicked person, you separate them from everybody else like wheat from the chaff, and then you drive a cart over them. So he's basically saying if you have a wicked person in your life, commit vehicular homicide. Now, obviously, that is overblown. That's not literally what he means when he says that, but he's using this highly expressive language in order to get a point across. Another example in Jesus is when he says it's better to cut your arm off than to sin. So Jesus uses this a lot in his teachings. He uses hyperbolic language in order to get the point across, and he doesn't mean things necessarily literally. Also, there isn't a set concept of hell in Jesus' day because our idea of hell developed over time. In the Old Testament, they believed in Sheol, just a place called the grave where you go and you have a minimal existence. And by Jesus' time, the Romans and the Greeks have invaded and colonized, and ideas and concepts like Hades have come into Jewish thought. And that's the only time that we really start to see concepts of hell in an afterlife. So what this means for us is that when we're looking at Jesus' teachings on hell, he's not trying to create a systematic theology. He himself doesn't even have a set definition of what hell is. And that gets us into the third point, that Jesus teaches multiple conflicting things about hell. So for these three reasons, I think the most honest thing someone can say about the teachings of Jesus on hell is that we have no idea what the F he means. There's really no way to make it all fit together because the things that he says are so deeply conflicting with each other. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about this phrase, "Depart from me, for I've never known you." One place this phrase occurs is in Matthew 25, where Jesus is saying, if you don't feed the sick or visit those in prison, then you didn't feed me or visit me when I was in prison, and therefore I'm going to say, I never knew you. So if you take that literally, then if you passed a guy on the street who was homeless and you didn't give him money or help him out in any way, then you're going to hell. The other two places that this occurs in Matthew 7 and Luke 13, Jesus is clearly talking about his enemies or false prophets. And he uses this ambiguous, conflicting language on hell to basically say, hey, don't do that, don't oppose.